goes way beyond you or me or even the politicians, the political classes, millions of people voted in frustration or anger, whatever you want to describe it, with the status quo, with our member... By the way, parenthetically, I spent all the referendum campaign, I played no role nationally, in South Yorkshire. After immigration, which did come up a lot on the doorstep, guess what the biggest single reason was that I was given why people were voting Brexit? Because they were fed up that Sheffield was constantly being told what to do by London. So they were voting against Brussels to score a point against London. Setting that aside, expectations have been raised. And my worry, and I want to just understand whether you share that worry, is that as people condemn Theresa May or the government or whoever, that Brexit isn't the great sort of cornucopia of goodies that they thought it was, where does the anger go then? Where does the rage go then? My worry is it'll just go, we'll just go from one set of disappointed expectations to the next.
The anger will come if the establishment do frustrate the referendum result and do attempt to make us vote again. Now, we've seen this, of course, in Denmark. We've seen it twice in Ireland. And that's where the anger would be. Look, Nick, the big picture is the 29th of March next year. Because that, if we leave the Treaty of Rome at the end of that day...
It's not really, Nigel,
in 100 years' time is all the history books will write about.
If Spanish trawlers still scoop up fish off the Cornish
coast... once we're a sovereign nation...
If European Court of Justice judges still determine...
a sovereign nation...
If we still pay $40 billion...
I think you're missing the point.
Well, no,
once we've left the Treaty of Rome... Even if the current weak-kneed government have signed up unnecessarily to a whole load of stuff they didn't need to, as a free nation, we will be able to have free general elections where everything can be debated and decided by a British government.
On this idea of a totally free sovereign country, isn't the reality that has always been obscured that actually there's no such thing as a completely self-governing country? I mean, we have willingly, forget the European Union for a moment, forget Brussels and all the stuff that you've in a sense, as a lifetime, railed against. In NATO, for heaven's sake, Article 5, talk about a sacrifice of sovereignty. We have to send our boys and girls in harm's way to protect distant countries.
These are completely...
The WTO...
These are different models, Nick.
Hang on.
There are models across the world, and you just mentioned two, there are models where sovereign nations agree to work together. The point about the European process, that's about sovereign nations giving away decision-making ability to an unelected body at the centre. They are two completely different things. Well,
I would argue they're not. But now, listen, can I just... You said something just earlier which made my ears sort of prick up a bit. You said the establishment, this, that, and the other. Look, you're going to hate this, but you've got to accept, Nigel, you are now part of the Brexit establishment that runs this country.
I am
hang on. No, here you go.
Kaboom. I never
finally got to run. I know you hate to be... I've just heard the most establishment answer earlier about young people that I could possibly... Hang on, let me explain. Let me explain. You... Paul Dacre, the hedge fund managers, Rupert Murdoch, all those, and by the way, they tend to be men of a certain age, very, very wealthy. Many of them, by the way, unlike you, don't even live or pay tax here. You are, whether you like it or not. Of course, you have differences with Boris Johnson and Michael Gove, but you've won, and I'm now outside the establishment. Boy, am I outside the establishment. You guys have won. What I think personally, I find a little bit unsatisfactory is that. You've won, you have the responsibility of victory, and now you're rushing to say, but the victory is nothing to do with me, Gov, and how it's being applied is nothing to do with me, Gov. At the end of the day, if you win in a democracy and you're on the winning side, you have to kind of take some responsibility for that rather than pretending something has nothing to do with it. I mean,
look,
how long can you be anti-establishment when you're part of the establishment?
Well, I'm not part of the establishment.
You are.
I'm so far from the establishment. If I was part of it... Do you know something?
Public school, city...
Do you know something? After 20
commodity
years,
traders.
After 20 years working in business and then getting into politics, you would have thought, would you not, that if I was part of the establishment, this government would actually have used me in some constructive way. Now, I may not have been the right person to be involved with renegotiations in Brussels, and I accept that. I'm not particularly popular up at the European Commission. But if I was part of the establishment, if I'd been accepted by the establishment, they would have sent
emissary to Trump.
They would have sent me to America to do something there, because frankly, our ambassador and the president can't even speak to each other. But they haven't chosen to do so. So do you know something? I don't think I'll ever be an accepted part of the establishment, but I don't really care. It doesn't really bother me. As long as we leave that treaty at the end of next March, that's the thing that matters.
Isn't the truth that, because I've obviously watched you, debated with you, you bested me on two notable occasions into it. I mean, you're obviously a highly skilled debater, but you're I get the impression, and actually look at you now, you're like sort of Loki. You know Loki, the god of chaos in the Marvel films, the evil brother of Thor, I think it is. You're a brilliant harbinger of kind of mischief and chaos, and you're not actually comfortable with the idea that you might actually have to kind of take responsibility for doing stuff.
As I say, if this government...
Does Loki Farage, does that sit well with you?
Oh, look, I like a bit of chaos. I make no bones
there
about
you go.
That.
The inner Loki's coming out.
But if this government had asked me to take on any responsible position for them, whether it's in Europe or America, I would gladly have done so. They haven't asked. And you know what? They'll never ask. It's not going to be Sir Nigel, Sir Nick.
Well, but by the way, I very happily swapped my knighthood for having another vote on Brexit.
We are
very happily.
Where we are.
Nigel, just two or three more questions, if I may. First, this is quite a substantive one, but I think it goes to the heart of some of what we've talked about. Actually goes right back to your experience in the commodities markets, where you sort of said you saw a kind of global economy which you felt was being stifled by European red tape and so on. I've read before, you're a keen student of history. Actually, over history, the single biggest cause for why two economies trade with each other is not technology, is not what you saw on your screens or your paperwork in the city at the time in the 80s. It's geography. There's a reason why we trade more with a little island of 4 million people or so than we do with giants like India and China. It's the reason why Canada and Mexico will always trade more with America. I mean, as you know, academics have estimated roughly that for every mile of distance you double between two economies, you halve the amount of trade between them. And as you know, the government itself says even if you have a all-singing, all-dancing new trade agreement with your mate Donald Trump, it will only add about 0.2% of to British GDP. So can I just press you on this? I think it's very seductive. I hear it all the time across the country. People love this idea of global Britain, swashbuckling, buccaneering Britain. It's slightly inconsistent with some of the reactions of people like you about having a French company print blue passport covers. But isn't this basically a profoundly misleading proposition that there's this cornucopia of new trade deals on the other side of the planet which can replace what we lose in our own neck of the woods?
I think that the world is changing. I think historically what you've just said is right. But I think the world is changing. And I think so much more...
Is it really?
Yeah, I do think so, actually. So much more of what we do in terms of business now is at the press of a button, that the world has become an incredibly small place in terms of business. And you say what we're going to lose. The worst case scenario is that the European Commission do not follow economic logic and decide we're going to have some form of tariff regime. All right, that is the worst case scenario.
I don't think they will, by the way.
In the end, I think BMW and the others will force them into saying...
No, they've said already, by the way.
Let's be grown up.
There's no plot. They've said already there won't be any tariffs.
Let's be grown up about this. But the worst case scenario is that we did face some form of tariff. Do you know, on most manufactured goods, the level of that tariff is less than the weekly fluctuation of the currency.
But as you said to me earlier,
I'm not worried about it. I'm not, Nick. I am really not worried about it.
But Nigel, tariffs, as you know, are on physical goods. You've rightly said earlier in the same sentence that actually what we trade very well as
services.
Is services, and that, as you know, is where we are heavily dependent on nearby markets.
But the honest truth is, no, even that's not true, Nick. And actually, the European single market, 30 years on, there are still many retail products in financial services that we're banned from selling in France and Germany. So, I take
Nigel,
the view.
Why is it that we trade more with Ireland than we do with huge economic superpowers on the other side of the planet?
You're right. We've actually been very misguided over the course of the last couple of decades.
But it doesn't stop the Germans trading much more with China.
In terms of our, there seems to have been in corporate Britain a complete obsession with the European project. I believe Brexit will break that. No, look, I'm very optimistic about the future in terms of our position in the world. And again, taking a long historical view on this, the Eurozone now is about 15-17% of global GDP. It's no more than that. And it declines roughly by 1% with every year that goes by. Fast forward 10 or 15 years from now, and you'll find the European Union actually is less than 10% of global GDP.
The point
so let's think bigger.
Yes, let's think bigger. No, these, if I may say so, these sort of, and they are slightly sort of platitudinous now, these things about think bigger and optimistic, what they can't do is abolish geography. There's a tectonic and geological reason why we are a European economy.
Because we're looking...
But you're going to
go on doing...
But Nigel, you've asserted...
Whenever in history have you had to have political union to buy and sell widgets from each other? It's nonsense.
No, I agree with that.
It's
But equally, we don't send gunboats now to sort of far distant countries to get them to sort of open their markets to us. It's a wholly different world. I agree with that. But one, oddly enough, where geography still plays, I think, a determining role on why and how economies trade. We will see.
We will disagree on that.
I think the wish to sort of wish away geography is one of the greatest delusions, I think, in the present day. But we will see. No, two final questions. Was the past a better place?
I don't know. I wasn't there.
A great answer. No, but you know what I mean. What, do you sort of, because you talk, particularly when you talked about your Damascene conversion on that train up from Kent to the ERM, you can talk as if we lost something which we had in the past. Is that your view? You think we should be going back to something? Which
I think in 1945, one country lost World War II, and it was us. We were the losers. We were the ones who lost everything. We were bankrupted. Our big imperial possessions started to disappear. We had a massive crisis of confidence as a nation that went on all through the 50s, 60s, 70s. And so, no, actually, I think in many ways I'm very bullish about Britain as it is right now. Yeah, we've got our problems. We've got our divisions. We've always had them. But I actually think that there is a great feeling, a great national spirit out there. We've changed. When you and I grew up, we accepted losing. We kind of wanted to do badly at the Olympics.
But I never accepted it.
But you know what I mean?
Speak for yourself.
But we kind of accepted failure. No. And now, actually, as a nation, we want to be successful. So I think there are some very positive, good things to look forward to.
And then finally, you famously said, I think on the eve of the result of the referendum being announced, that if it was 52-48 the other way, in other words...
No, I said if it's 52-48 to remain,
the battle goes on.
There will be irreconcilable voices within the Conservative Party who will battle on. But I said I doubt the establishment would give us another try at this for 25 years.
But what would you recommend to people who have very narrowly lost, feel that a lot of false claims have been made about Brexit bring about? Do you recommend they just go quietly, or do you not think there is a perfectly coherent case, which you, from a different point of view, used to make, that the British people should have the final say on how we leave the European Union? It shouldn't be the political class. Isn't the true anti-establishment thing, in keeping with your own sort of ethos as a self-proclaimed anti-establishment politician, that it should be the people and not the politicians who have the final say on how we leave?
Yeah, and the people don't want a second referendum. There's absolutely
they don't want a second referendum. A first referendum on the terms of our departure.
Yeah, and what happens then?
They decide.
Do you know what, Nick? For the first time,
I was delighted when you heard when I heard you say you were agreeing with me that we should.
I don't want a second referendum.
No, you don't want it,
but I've always feared
because you're like the Brexit establishment. Now that you've narrowly won the first hurdle, you don't want to risk the British people having another say.
I have to tell you, I think you're whistling in the wind now.
No.
I think it's going to happen, and I now think we will leave on March the 29th.
Nigel, you may be right.
And
my
you know
question
what?
is more about
these debates. We can have these debates for years to come about how we manage our economy, how close we are to the European Union. The big thing is leaving the Treaty of Rome. And you know something? It's going to happen.
No, Nigel, you may be right. I'm not disputing that, and I think it is more likely. I will continue to fight until the nth minute to give the British. My question is a subtly different one. It's again about your belief in democracy and your views as an anti-establishment politician. In the same way, I'm very struck by what I think is a very establishment response to the sentiment of young people. I'm very struck that you, as a anti-establishment politician, is basically now saying, notwithstanding the fact that John Redwood, David Davis and others have always claimed that the British people should sort of bookend the whole process, take the decision to leave in the first place, but also be sovereign in taking the decision how we leave. I just find it, to put it politely, sort of intellectually gymnastic now to somehow say the British people can't have a say.
But the demand's not there. It's just not there.
Yeah, do you think the demand was overwhelmingly there in the first place?
Oh yes, absolutely, no question about that.
Because I was an MP for 12 years, and I was quite an assiduous. Well, obviously not assiduous enough because I lost my seat. But I used to knock on doors every single week for over a decade. I can probably count on the fingers of two hands the number of times people said, the thing that worries me much more than the NHS or apprenticeships or crime down the street or the pothole at the end of this lane is our membership of the European Union.
Well, how can you separate the NHS from membership of the European Union? How can you separate the NHS from a country whose population is rising by 500,000 every year? Our public services who simply can't cope with the numbers. These things were related. You chose not to see them. I think there was...
But isn't the reverse now? This is my point. My final point. I know you won't accept. But can I put it to you?
Nick, if there was a genuine desire out there in the country to have another vote on the final deal or whatever